Today's guest is Isabelle Rodriguez-Wilson. From Capitol Hill to the White House, Isabelle has worked with international dignitaries, members of Congress, high-level federal and state government officials, corporate and special interest groups, and entertainment celebrities. She served the White House as senior advisor to the President of the United States. In this role, she directed the elaborate details associated with the domestic and international event activities, travel, protocol, and media for President Clinton and First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton. Whew. All right, stay tuned. We're still going. This is incredible. In 2005, Isabelle and her husband, Eric, moved to Northern Nevada when she accepted the role of executive director of the Boys and Girls Club of North Lake Tahoe. Then, in 2012, she was named the executive director of the Nevada Women's Fund. In her 10 years, the Nevada Women's Fund experienced exponential growth in funding and engagement through its donor network and its annual signature event, Salute to Women of Achievement. And last month, Isabelle retired to enjoy life with her husband and 12-year-old son, Julian. Isabelle's career is very reflective of her personality. She is scrappy, she hustles, and she is charismatic. I cannot even tell you how excited and honored I am to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really been an amazing journey, and the fact that you've even invited me to share it is really kind of special.
The fact that we're sharing the same space right now is special, so I'm just so thrilled. Let's start with kind of the big piece of this bio. Your career, especially that kind of big piece of your career, the White House. Let's dive into that.
Yes, well, that just doesn't happen with a snap of the fingers, so I had to really be prepared to be able to get that slot. So it's going to take us to some pre-White House years. Before Washington, D.C., I was actually born and raised in Southern California. I'm one of 7 children of a blended family with not a lot of resources, and actually none of us went to college because we didn't have that opportunity to go at that time. In that time period. So Isabelle, with skills of shorthand and typing, decided that she would take that to the office instead of taking it to the grape fields of the valley in California, as the rest of my family did. Don't ask me why I was different. Don't ask me why I thought differently, but I just knew that sorting tomatoes and picking grapes was not Isabelle's future. And so I took my typing and my shorthand skills from high school, and in the summer of, I think, 1966, I lied on my resume that I was 18 when I was really 16. And in those days, nobody checked your driver's license or did background checks. They just looked at you. If you looked like you could type and you had a great smile, you were in. And so previous to the White House, I had perfected my skills, clerical skills, and ended up doing office work. Well, what did that do? It took me to a law firm, and from a law firm, it took me to a law school, and that's where I met my practice husband. My practice husband at that point had an interest in going to law school, and he had a fiance who was skilled beyond crazy in shorthand and in typing. So we left California. He was accepted to Harvard Law School, and I found myself at Harvard Law School working with Alan Dershowitz, who's the well-known criminal justice attorney who is really well-known in the nation. I then worked with Lawrence Tribe, who headed up constitutional law. And I also worked with Professor Charles Haar, who headed up property. And those 3 male professors just fed my insatiable appetite for the unknown. When I asked a question, they answered. When I did it wrong, they corrected me. And not always easily. One of those stories is that I was taking dictation by Professor Fisher in international law, and he was writing a letter to Henry Kissinger that I was so well taking in shorthand. And in the letter, he describes that he had gone shopping at the bazaar. He and his wife had gone shopping at the bazaar, and he wanted Henry Kissinger to know that it was a fabulous experience. I transcribed the letter and typed the bazaar as B-I-Z-Z as opposed to shopping bazaar, B-A-Z. he came storming out of his office and he said, "Young lady, do you have a dictionary?" And I said, "No, but I have this little word thing here. It helps me spell words." And I said, "There it is, bizarre." And he said, "Do you know the definition of bizarre?" And I said, "Well, apparently not. And I will fix that right now and edit." He went to his office, he put on his top coat, he put on a fedora hat, and he left the office. And he came back 30 minutes later with a dictionary from the school store, and he slammed it on my desk, and he said, "Use it." And I said, "Yes, sir. I have that dictionary today." It was pivotal in terms of understanding what I needed to do next. So I worked with the Harvard Law professors. One of those professors liked me so much that he created a research project for my then practice husband to go to Washington, D.C. to do some research. The truth was that he wanted me to get to Washington, D.C., and he did it by way of my practice husband. And so I was introduced to Washington, D.C. in 1974. And that was when my eyes opened. I became involved there. We ended up moving there. I began working for a law firm there. And then it all begins to grow, all because of my shorthand and typing skills. I had no clue that that would happen. So then in 1984, I was voluntold to participate in the Mondale-Ferraro campaign, although it wasn't Ferraro at the time. It was Walter Mondale, who had not yet announced his running mate. And I had been voluntold, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I didn't know where I was working or what I was doing because I didn't understand the structure of a political campaign. I was just doing what they told me to do. Well, where I landed was in the Office of Scheduling in Advance. Every political candidate, be they Democrat or Republican or independent, or your state governor, or your mayor, or your senators, or your members of Congress, all have scheduling offices. And why is that? Because every president, every elected person has only 24 hours in a day. Like I said, even the President of the United States. So that time is managed very carefully. And then what he, until there is a she, and what he needs to do must be implemented. That office is called Scheduling in Advance. And I fell into the Office of Scheduling in Advance. So I worked the candidates campaign and worked with Joan Mondale in 1984, traveled the country, visited every state in the country in 1984. We lost that election. I went back to work at the law firm that I was working with. In 1988, I got a phone call and they said, "Find Isabelle. She's really amazing. She handles this. She does it without getting upset. You know, she makes it happen. She gets it done. She's dependable. She's reliable. You can count on her." While they were saying that, I was wondering how I was going to get through it. I didn't know that they already thought I was a star. I thought I was going to lose my job at the end of every project. That's why I applied so much effort every time. So in 1988, we lost. Now we're Michael Dukakis and Dukakis Benson, and I get involved in that campaign. And again, I travel the country entirely for that campaign. And then we lost again in 1988. And by 1990, I was now divorced. And in 1992, I get a phone call from the Clinton campaign. And they call and say, "We're looking for you because you have a reputation of scheduling in advance. We want you to come down to Little Rock, Arkansas." My divorce was just final. I had my settlement that I was ready to go. And I said, "Why not? Let's try this one more time." And so I got in my car, drove down to Little Rock, and became the advance director for Hillary Clinton. That worked so well, they gave me Tipper Gore. So I managed both the travel and the staff that supports the travel and the event implementation for Hillary Clinton and for Tipper Gore for the 1992 campaign. And then we won. And I was in disbelief. I'm still in disbelief that we won in 1992. And as campaigns go, they wrap up pretty much in 72 hours. If you're on the payroll, you're pretty much done in 72 hours to close that account. And if you win, you're now going into the pre-election budget. And so I looked around the room, which was kind of a newsroom at the Arkansas Gazette down in Little Rock. It was a newsroom setting. It was very open. And I looked across and I saw that George Stephanopoulos did not have a job offer. And I thought, if George doesn't have a job offer, I sure as hell do not have a job offer. So I quietly packed up my box, as I usually like to do, got in my car and drove back to Washington, D.C. And in 4 days, I got a phone call. And it was Maggie Williams who said, I'm calling on behalf of the president-elect, and he would like to know if you would head the Office of Scheduling in Advance for the White House, for the administration. Honestly, to be really candid with you, campaigns really operate off of weeks and months and not permanent positions. So I was really smart, and I said, is this an 8-week assignment or is it a job? The answer was, it's a job, and the president wants you to make sure that you open that office and that the inauguration goes well. And so that is how I ended up at the White House, and later found out it was Hillary that said to the president-elect, I want Isabelle to run the Office of Scheduling in Advance, and I want her for the first time ever in this office to run it for both the president and the first lady. So you're looking or speaking to the first woman who ever held that office at the White House. And it was the first time that both the first lady and the president were managed under one director. And I'm alive and here talking about it today.
I'm blown away. Also, can't help but think, but in some alternate universe, Isabelle's on a farm picking grapes as well. Not having this total, I mean, the potential was in you that whole time, and it stemmed from you in a typing class.
It did, in a typing class and in shorthand, and with people around me who believed in me. I didn't know how valuable that was then. It clearly today is really important. Who we surround ourselves with, the positiveness of the people in our universe, and how we move forward in that universe.
Thank you for sharing that story with us. It is so inspiring. I mean, I have goosebumps. I have such deep admiration for what you've accomplished. And in spite of all of that, there's this humbleness in you. And it's this common theme that people that have done really great things. One of the hallmarks is you ask them about it and they're like, it was the people around me. It is so, I don't have a word for it. There's a lot of reverence. It's so inspirational.
Well, I think often, or at least in my case, I don't know in others, other individual cases, is that for me, I never was sure I was hitting the mark. It was all about, am I going to make it to the end? It was me in my little cocoon. It was me in my little world trying to overcome my lack of confidence or my lack of self-esteem or whatever shortfall somehow I thought that I had at that time. And I kept it secret and quiet to myself, but others just saw a smile and said, oh my gosh, she's so amazing. Let's help her do something else. Little did they know internally I was struggling with accomplishment.
Well, and some people deal with insecurity, and I certainly do, often dealing with insecurity in a kind of retreating into yourself. And you used that level of insecurity as a driving force to push beyond what you thought you could do and what was possible.
I believe it was really rooted in my responsibility as a second to the oldest child in a blended large family of 7 children. And so with large families, they begin to self-regulate because the older children help the younger children. And that is where I think I first picked up my responsibility, which was to do well. And for Mom, because we were codependent, my mother was a teenager when I was born. And so we were very connected and very close. And she instilled in me the responsibility of coming and doing everything really well. And it stuck with me. And so it just carried through any professional assignment that I had later. Frankly, I just wanted to do well. I just wanted to do well. The fact that it took me to the White House and traveling on Air Force One around the world, that's a very different story.
Do and do well. The one thing you said, Isabelle gets it done. That's what they said about you. That was, you were reliable, you were consistent, you were persistent. Isabelle gets it done.
Yes.
And done well.
And done well. And I think, now as I look back in retrospect, I was building a reputation and I was building a brand. I was really building the profile of Isabelle. We're not all the same. Obviously, we know that. We're all born with different DNA, and some of us excel and we're extroverts. Some of us are introverts. Some of us are storytellers. Some of us don't tell stories at all. And my package just happens to be that collection of really positive pieces that I can smile when I really want to cry. I can actually go, oh goodness, when I really want to scream. Somehow I have a way of being able to get to the end or finding a result. And I'm happy for having that in my package. It took me to different places. And people believed in me, and they helped me, and they were important to me. They were my resource. Why? Because Isabelle wasn't a migrant worker from her family, and Isabelle didn't go to college. And so my competition were the master's degrees and the undergraduate degrees and the PhDs of public policy. And for me to break that ground was challenging in every bit of the way. Any way you can talk about it, it was challenging.
Can we dive a little deeper into that? Because it sounds like in the beginning, a lot of it was you following a skill set that you had and getting opportunities. There was a transition period of from you being voluntold, as you said, to truly a position of power and leadership. And you were no longer voluntold. You were running the show. You were orchestrating the most important people in our country's entire day. That's a major period of growth. It sounds like it happened in a really pretty condensed period of time. Can we talk through that growth period?
Yes, and I would say that it is the time period is when I started working in political engagement, because timing in campaigns is a very important issue. You only have 24 hours in a day, and you have to cover the whole country. Little do you know that that's your preparation, that 24 hours in a day now applies to the globe, to the whole world, because you're leader of the free world. And now you've elevated this to another level. So at first it was very intimidating. I didn't want to say a word. I just wanted to do my thing and move out. But there was something with me then that I identified that I used as a tool going forward. And that is, I'm very observant. I am very observant. I look at models that work. I look at individuals that have just positive results. And I look at that style, and then I look to modify that style for my own implementation. And so watching people be patient, watching people ask more questions, and to listen more were characteristics and just exercises that I saw were helpful. And that's what I pulled in, was to listen and not ask the question, as opposed to feeling like you need to ask all the questions while you're sitting in the conference room next to the Oval Office. You don't have to do that. You can listen to all the questions and everyone who wants to be in the president's face. There is a place to listen.
Every day you hear about people making money by investing in IPOs and startups. But what about you? These kinds of investments are simply not available to Main Street investors. At Rowe Capital Group, we are committed to providing access to strategic, early-stage, primarily low-market correlated investment opportunities. Accredited investors go to rowecapitalgroup.com for more information. Rowe Capital Group, empowering your financial journey.
You haven't necessarily touched on it directly, but indirectly, some of these skill sets and innate qualities that you have, patience, listening, observing. Before we came on and started formally talking in the show, we had a chance to meet you just beforehand, and we were just observing the differences that can occur with generations. And Candace and I are both elder millennials. We work with other younger millennials and Gen Z. We work with Gen Xers. We work with baby boomers. I think there's something that I don't know if you would attribute it to a generational identity or some characteristics that were common of other baby boomers, or whether you'd attribute it to something else. But I'm interested in having a look at the differences between our generations, and then maybe talking about how those differences can perhaps be embraced, because I think in society right now, there's a little bit of resistance to embracing our differences across generations. And I think there's room for fluidity here and room to just observe kind of how we think about generational differences. Sorry, there's a lot there. I am really good at compound questions.
I love that question because it really isn't only today. In the 1980s, we didn't have digital communication and computerized and visual ways to communicate with each other from across the country, from one eastern state to a western state. We didn't have that. Let's talk about the election of 1984. It was still, happy days are here again, and red, white, and blue and flags, and we really hadn't moved into some contemporary music. The Dukakis campaign introduced that and attempted to lift it with Michael Jackson songs and 80s current music that would connect that campaign and see if they couldn't transition to attract a younger audience. We want younger voters, right? We want a growing audience. Well, that didn't work either. Well, in 1992, when we had the Clinton campaign, was the MTV crowd. We're coming right out of the 80s. And so the campaign from Isabelle's eyes has a very different makeup than the 1984 campaign or the 88 campaign. The 1992 campaign has the MTV crowd. And they have been doing amazing things in the campaign. And then we win. And those individuals get identified to move into the White House to carry that same message. The MTV crowd doesn't wear slacks. The MTV crowd doesn't wear a shirt and tie. The MTV crowd doesn't cut their hair in a traditional male cut with trimmed at the neck and combed over to the side. The MTV crowd that worked the campaign were dressed in shorts and loafers, unironed shirts, and hair that was spiked. And MTV was the way to communicate. So yes, I actually saw that transition that happened in the White House, in the moving from the old ways of communicating and public relations for a presidential candidate to a further reaching media. You could actually go there. And that's when you saw on the presidential side, you didn't see in 1984 Walter Mondale play a saxophone on Arsenio Hall. You didn't see, Michael Dukakis, who wore, loafers, do anything on the night shows. But you saw President Clinton play a saxophone on the Arsenio Hall show, which then carried with MTV. So the changing of the times, yes, brought the generational change because they were becoming involved in the campaign and in public policy and becoming involved in what's important for them and their feelings for their country and what they would like here. So we saw it electronically a little bit. And now from there, 1992 to now, 2022, what are we? 30 years different? 40?
30 years.
30
different.
years in there? Yeah, there's a lot of change. So I embrace it. I'm going to say it was hard at that time. Let me finish that question because it was loaded. It was really hard at that time to understand the what appeared to be an undisciplined and informed and experienced media team. That's what it looked like in 1992. In 2022, they knew their shit and they were working it, and that's how we got off the ground.
That's amazing. I love that so much. And it's funny that you say all this because we still deal with this. And it tells me that we'll continue to deal with this as new generations come up. The older generations are going to have a hard time sometimes accepting what is now the norm. And it's the plight of every campaign trying to get younger voters, right?
It is the plight of every political campaign, but it's also the same challenge for any organization, whether you're a nonprofit, are you a corporation? What is the marketing of your corporation and branding? What is the market that you're looking for, the demographic that you're looking for? Are you cutting into someone else's margin? Are you looking to take away from that margin? And so it isn't only applied in the political, but across the working spectrum.
And not even across the political and working spectrum, also across personal spectrums.
Yes.
The crux of it's how do we communicate effectively with those that are not our immediate peer group?
I think then, I don't know if we will come away from your topic, but this might be where you also cross over into leadership. Because when you get into leadership and you have individuals who are aware of these types of impacts on that is generational impact, technology growth impact, anything that's growing is moving forward. And I believe leaders who have vision for the assignments that they're on are okay with that evolving world. They are okay with what's happening because it's going to happen regardless. You can't stop the transition. So leadership identifies that the country is moving politically, corporationally, product-wise. We are moving. We're now much more global engagement than we are separate United States. And so in my mind, it's the leader that evolves from that, who doesn't resist,
who
the
embraces.
change. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a way to appreciate and acknowledge that speaking to a new audience or attempting to relate with a new audience is not typically intended to disenfranchise the other audience or the existing audience. There's room. There's room, and I think it can be sometimes taken as an offense if an organization or politically they're trying to get to a different demographic, that we're being forgotten, or this is incredibly disrespectful. And I don't see that being the case, because I remember that kind of being the thing is, he's disrespecting The Office by playing the saxophone on. It's like, no, he's not disrespecting. That has nothing to do with you. And we saw it with Obama. We see it time and again that anytime there's this attempt to kind of reach that new demo, it's a slap to maybe an existing or prior group.
It's a percentage of that audience that may feel like their commitment and their contributions for their time and their society and their generation is not being appreciated. And I assume that's the case. I don't assume defensively. It is my generation. It's the way I grew up. I was born in 1950. Mother told me the best way to keep a household was to make sure it was clean. As long as I did it all on my heels and mopped and put things away. I was supposed to do all of my domestic chores Monday through Friday when my husband was at work so that we could be together on Saturday and Sunday. That's the generation I grew up in. I'm sorry, I don't live that way today. It is 2022 and I've made the change. Many people have made that change. Some people just get stuck in time. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And some of us move with the group and we just keep moving. And some of us take it into leadership and do something with it.
I think this is a really beautiful conversation because I think socially it feels as though there's this kind of conflict, this push and pull with boomers and millennials. And we're sitting here having this really great conversation and talking about how there's really so much similarity.
Oh my
and
gosh.
Also, boomers went through exactly what millennials went through of being the generation of shaking up and changing things.
I mentioned earlier in the program, I am 71-year-old mother of a 13-year-old son. Did you realize the generations between that kid and me? Huge.
That's why you're so woke.
I have to attempt to be. Yes, it means listening and watching and trying to figure out how he and I can communicate so he gets it. Now, I laugh when he calls me boomer. Oh, Mom, you're just a boomer. And I go, you are damn right, dude.
Does he say, okay, boomer to you?
Okay, boomer. Yeah. Okay, boomer. But I realize now that at this stage of the game, it has all evolved over time. And thank goodness I've stayed current with it because I do understand. I don't know how it works, but I do know what TikTok is. I do know what Instagram is. I do know what those, new mediums for reaching out to audiences are. And I understand that he at this moment is at a developmental stage where he's exploring as a 13-year-old boy. And so I'm more patient than I may have been when my mother said, no, you have to do it this way. So in 1966, she had to discipline differently than I do in 2022.
In a couple of different ways, you've indicated that you accept change. You said it's happening. It will happen. It will continue to happen. You can embrace it or you can resist it. I think I tend to personally resist some change because it's scary. It's far easier to just stay where we're comfortable, stay with what we know. Change can be scary. It can be hard. It can be difficult. We might not understand. It might be very fear-based. For anyone in our audience that has dealt with some form of resistance to any kind of change, what advice would you give them about kind of releasing a little bit of that resistance and moving toward a curiosity or being a little more open to change?
I think for that answer, I really would say it really depends on the individual. And remember, we're all in such different and separate circumstances. Some of us are in working environments and in public exposure. Some of us are stay-at-home moms. Some of us are community moms and, dealing with the community women and some organizations they may be associated with. Some of us, we're just different. So I think that there isn't a one way fits all. I think it really depends on what's right for you and what's right for your character and your personality and the attributes that are important and positive for you. And what does that mean? That means stopping for a moment, finding a place, taking a deep breath, and doing an inventory of yourself. How about you just do an inventory of the qualities that you have and think about moving those qualities forward?
That is beautiful. That's fantastic advice.
Just stop and do an inventory. And when you look at your inventory, there will be some things in there one may want to change, but there's probably some pretty spectacular things that you want to embrace and you want them to be done differently and more broadly.
Thank you so much for this conversation, Isabelle. We're lucky to have had this conversation with you. For our listeners, you can get more information at rowecapitalgroup.com. Check underneath the show notes and on our blog. You can also email us with questions. We love to hear from you. The email is media@rowecapitalgroup.com. And then check us out on TikTok, Women TF Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And Isabelle, again, thank you so much for being here with us.
And thank you for inviting me.
This overview is for informational purposes only. We might include some projections, and those should not be relied upon for the purpose of investing. Past performance is not indicative of future results, and any investments we mention are meant for accredited investors only. And any offer can only be considered upon review of a prospectus and relevant offering documentation. So please keep this in mind as we move through this overview, and remember that these are our opinions only.